Good evening and welcome everybody. Thank you, Catherine. Huge pleasure to be here. Huge pleasure to see you. We're here mostly or primarily because, to my great delight, Montvellier Red came through in our Wine Champs tasting this year. Regrettably, sales have gone so well we're out of stock, as Catherine mentioned, but there is more on its way. So that's good. But hopefully one or two of you might have managed some stock before then. I happen to have a case at home already, so I was lucky. So we're talking Montvellier, we're talking Esporao, which is a historic estate in the Alentejo region. Beautiful property. It's only about 15 kilometers from the Spanish border. But despite all its history, it's only been making wine, or it's only released wine since 1985, I think, I looked up, which doesn't seem all that long ago. David's been there since 1992, I think. Is that right, David?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Prior to that, David was, he was already in Portugal. He worked with the Symingtons in the Douro. He was involved in establishing Quinta do Crasto and Quinta de la Rosa in the Douro Valley.
Yeah.
He is a proud Portuguese citizen, which means that he's got two hats always. He's a proud Aussie, which I know because his visits to the UK are really quite often timed with rugby and cricket tours. But he's a proud Portuguese citizen of some 15 years as well. So he's very good at flying the flag for Portuguese football as well. David and I first met over 30 years ago. It would have either been when I was studying MW, or it might have even been before that, doing WSET studies, diploma and the like, when David used to come and talk to we aspiring students. And he was a heartthrob flying winemaker, which was the trend in those days. So we've known each other for many, many years. David has been in Portugal now for over 40, I think.
Just on 40 years, actually.
Over 40 years. So he's been made Winemaker of the Year in Portugal numerous times. He's been recognized by the Portuguese government. So who better to talk to us about Portugal and to talk to us about Esporao and particularly the Alentejo, but also he's going to touch on their other properties. So David, welcome. Great to see you.
Thanks very much. It's
far away.
That was a lovely introduction, Joe, and yeah, I have been reminiscing a little bit about how long ago it was that we first caught up, but it's somewhere between 30 and 40, well, probably 35 years ago. Okay, so I'm happy to kick off. I don't have the I'll need the PowerPoint at some point. Yeah, okay. So as Joe said, I've been in Portugal for a long time, and I've had an interesting history through being in the port trade for a number of years and starting up projects in the Douro. But I have been now at Esporao for going on 30 years, and it's been a great ride. We've grown the company a lot over that time, and I'll try and pass most of that on tonight as we go through the slides. So that the first one just does show a very typical Alentejo shot of an old medieval castle, which is our symbol. It's on the property, it's on our estate, and so that's the main thing. The main things to see in this first slide, I suppose, are typically the vineyards the geography is quite flat, so these vineyards are fairly typical Alentejo vineyards. It's how it's a countryside of wide expanses and wide horizons and fantastic sunsets and starry nights. It's a great place to get away from it all, and it was, because it's so close to the Spanish border, as Joe mentioned. You do find these fortress towers in a lot of properties because they were the defense of the region against the marauding Moors and Spanish and whoever was trying to get through over the years. So that's a nice introductory shot. We'll just skip over this fairly quickly. We have to show you our mission statements and things like that. For me, the important thing here is is that it's a family company, and I've been very lucky to work with family companies over the years. The Symingtons were good people to work for, and the Roquette family are equally very passionate about the business and about keeping the family values within the company, and I'll mention that as we go through, because yeah, we're currently managed by the youngest son of the original owner, Joel Roquette, who will come up in one of the slides in a moment. So that's enough about that. So the boundaries of the property are unchanged since 1267. So it's a very old established estate. It was bought and founded by Zé Roquette, who's still the current owner, and he had a partner called Joaquim Bandeira at the time. Now there are 8 members of the family involved in the company. 300 employees, quite a big agricultural area. We have 769 of our own vineyards on site in our properties, and we have another 700 hectares of contracted vineyards. So we have long-term contracts with farmers, and in fact, a lot of the Montvalue fruit does come from farmers that we've worked with for the last over 20 years. So we have a good understanding of their grapes. We're moving into, well, we're now heavily into organic wines and organic viticulture. Olive oil has been something that's come along over the years. We're pretty big in that too, 1 million litres, and 16.5 million bottles produced and sold annually, 75% red, 25% white, and Montvalue is a big part of that. And we're selling all over the place, really. So yeah, I mean, when I joined in 92, we were 100% local market, and now we're 65% of our sales are exported. So we've built up a pretty big export market. So this is just a timeline that some of it I'll probably have to repeat, but anyway, 73, everything kicked off. And then in 74, 75, we had a revolution in Portugal. And so actually Dr. Roquette, who was the owner, fled to Brazil, and nothing much happened over the next 10 years because the property was occupied. Fortunately, they did keep the estate running, and the vineyards were maintained, but there was no Esporao project really until 1985, when Dr. Roquette came back from Brazil and set up Esporao as we built a winery, and we started producing wine. So 85 was the birth really of the Esporao brand. Export started about 5 years later. 91 is a very significant year because that's the first vintage of Montvalue, and I joined the company in 92. So basically, when I joined, there was no Montvalue. I put the blend together in 92 based on wines from 1991. Probably freshened it up a little bit with some 92 from that harvest, but I still remember it was about a 50,000 litre blend at that time, and we were just, we sent it out just to sort of feel the water and see how we go, because we actually the company started with Esporao, like very high-end wine, and we needed to have Montvalue as a sort of middle ground value for money wine. And yeah, so 50,000 litres, and then it doubled, and then it tripled, and we're now doing about 4.5 million litres of Montvalue red, and about 1 million litres of the white. So yeah, very significant year, 91, and so yeah, I have this very strong connection, having joined in 92 and put the first blend together and sort of help kick it off. 97, we started producing olive oil, although we didn't have our own olive oil plant on site. We bought an existing site somewhere nearby, and we launched our wine tourism. We have a very lovely cellar door restaurant operation going on the winery, and in 2008 we started experimenting with organic viticulture, doing trial work in the vineyard, for a number of years comparing organic fruit and conventional fruit, and seeing how we could adapt to organic viticulture, given it was a big undertaking, considering we were thinking about converting the whole of our vineyards, and that in Esporao was 450 hectares of vineyard. So 2008 was that we started getting a feel for organic viticulture, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. But we also, in 2008, we purchased a property up in the Douro called Quinta dos Morsas, and we started producing Douro wines. Okay, so that's the first of those timeline shots. Now the next one, please. So then 2010, nothing particularly important there, although we do have we have an amphilographic vineyard, which we have 188 different grape varieties. So we have a good base of conserving these fantastic Portuguese varieties and others as well. But we have our own amphilographic vineyard, so we have our own bank of vines and cuttings if we need them for the future. And then obviously there's a lot of work done up at the vineyard and winery up in the Douro at Quinta dos Morsas. 2014, we built a premium winery at Esporao called Adega das Lagares. Lagares being, I'll show you a picture of those afterwards, but Joe will know what they are. So we produced a premium. We built a winery for producing premium wines in 2014. In 2015, we started producing amphora wines, which I'll mention when I show you the slide after. But the amphora wines, Talia wines, have been part of the Alentejo history since Roman times. And if you go to villages and go to restaurants, a lot of wines are served directly from clay pots in jugs, and it's always been a feature of the region, but it's not something that you see commercially very often. But I guess because there's a lot of interest now in non-intervention wines and natural wines and orange wines and all these kind of weird and wonderful things, amphora wines for us is a way of producing something as natural and non-intervention as possible. So yeah, we've had a bit of fun with those. They're interesting. We started doing our first organic olive oil. 2016, we built our own olive oil plant on the property. So we're now producing our olive oils within the context of the Esporao estate. Montevideo celebrated 25 years, and it was apparently in that year it became the market leader in value in Portugal. So in Portugal, there are brands that sell more than Montevideo, but Montevideo in its price quality bracket is the biggest selling wine now in Portugal. And in terms of Quinta dos Morsas, we developed some individual terroir wines, if you like. One's called Minas and the other one is Margem and VV47, which I hope you'll all get to try one of these days. They're really outstanding wines. 2017 was apparently 750 years of establishment since the 1267 establishment of the boundaries of the property. We launched our first organic wine. So we were practicing organic viticulture for a number of years before that, and we felt that we were ready to launch our first. It was a 2015 Esporao Colheita red wine launched in 2017, and we started producing our first olive oils from our own plant on the property. 2019, we purchased Quinta da Mial, which is a Vinho Verde property, which I'll mention a bit later on. And there's something else there that I can't read because it's opening. It's opening or something there. I can't read that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm blocked off by our pictures on the screen, so I can't quite see what it is. Doesn't matter. Anyway. Moving on. So this is the Alentejo region down in the south of southern region of Portugal. We have the property itself is about 1,800 hectares, 450 hectares of vineyard, now all organic, and 80 hectares of olive oil. We have another property called Perdigões, which is owned by Esporão. We bought it because we needed more vineyard. Actually, we bought it because Montevideo was growing so fast during the 90s after we launched it in 92. I think in about 94, 95, we bought this property, Perdigões, so we'd have more fruit to keep the Montevideo brand up and running and moving. There's also a lot of archaeological stuff going on. Every time we start to plant a vineyard and we plough the land up, we dig up a lot of Roman ruins and ceramics and pots and things, and so there's a lot of archaeological digs going on in the area as well. And also there's a new area called Portugal, which Joe knows all about. So we have a vineyard up there, 11 hectares of vineyard, and we also have some farmers fruit there. So we're looking at Portugal. It's a cooler part of the northern area of the Alentejo, which we all think in the future will be increasingly important because of the effects of climate change. And so in Douro, we have the Quinta dos Morsas property is 155 hectares, so it's quite a big estate. 48 hectares of vineyard in the Douro is a lot in one property. So we found a property that we wanted to be in the Douro, but we wanted to be in a cooler part of the Douro because the Alentejo is a relatively hot area, and the Douro can be very cool and it can be very hot. And we found that, we found Morsas, which is in a Cima Corrigal, but it's in the lower end of the Cima Corrigal. So it's a very cool vineyard, and it's a very cool site. So we can produce more elegant wines there. That was the idea. Okay, and these are the important people that you need to see. So Zé Roquette, he's now probably 80 odd, and he's the guy that originally bought the estate, and he's still the founder. He was the founder, and he's still semi-retired. He's still part of the administration of the company. And his youngest son, João Roquette, joined us in about, I think it must have been 2007, because he was with us when we bought Morsas in 2008. And he's been very dynamic, and he's driven us on the sustainability road, if you like, and led us into organic viticulture. But he's also been instrumental, one in buying Quinta dos Morsas up in the Douro, later on Amial up in Vineyard, building the Adega dos Lagares winery at Esporao, bringing the olive oil plant into the same, into our estate. So he's in a relatively short time, so 2007, so about 12, 13 years, he's made some very significant and major changes, and it's actually kept, he's done a lot to sort of keep Esporao on the move, innovation, change. So yeah, he's done a great job, and these are also some important people in the company. Sandra Alves has been working with me now for 20 years, and she is now taking over the winemaking at Esporao. And Zé Luís Moreira is now making the wines full time up at Quinta dos Morsas. So I'm overseeing those, winemaking decisions and blending and so on. But I'm kind of, Joe, this is something interesting for you. I'm kind of moving into a wine culture and education role in the company for the next few years. To see how all that goes, but I'm still have an inherent role in what goes on in the wineries and blending and keeping the profile of the wines the same over the next few years. Anyway, another story. And this is just a lovely shot of the vineyards running down into a lake area. The lake is actually a dam that we built ourselves. This was also back in the 90s. It sort of coincided with the fact that once we started exporting, and we needed to have consistent production and quality and be able to supply markets, on a regular basis. Without the irrigation, we were finding, in the early years, our production was going up and down all the time, depending on how much winter rainfall we got and how much follow-up rains we got. We just couldn't sort of exist as a big player especially on the export market if we didn't have quality and quantity. So we built our own dam. It's a sort of a catchment area. There's a few water ways that run into it, but not a river as such. It's just kind of water inlets that if we get a decent winter rainfall, it fills up and we have enough water. The idea was the dam was sized to give us enough water that if we have 2 years of drought, it would get us through 2 years. And so far we haven't had more than 2 years. We have had 2 years of drought, but then we've been lucky to have rains. But it is a big, obviously it's a very significant issue to have in a hot climate like we have. We need to have water to get the vines through the growing season. So, we're okay for the time being anyway. So a little bit more about the Alentejo. It's 30% of the total land area in Portugal. It produces the majority of Portuguese bottled wines and olive oil. It's a very rich historical area. It's been overrun it's been occupied by the Romans, the Moors, the French, and Celts, but particularly the Romans and the Moors left much more of a legacy here. Hot and dry growing season, and irrigation needed. Some quite interesting soil conditions. A lot of granite and schist, marble, and there's some sort of volcanic soil as well on the property, which is interesting. There's reds I'll mention again. We have another slide about the grape varieties, and some excellent cuisine, as you can imagine: wild game, pork, mutton, and lots of herbs and spices. And so there we are down in the south, opposite, pretty much the same latitude as Lisbon, really. But we are lucky that we do get some coastal influence to moderate the climate a bit. As you go further into Spain, it gets hotter and hotter, and you come to La Mancha, which is really hot. So we're lucky that we do get some moderate cooling winds and some rainfall from the sea, from the Atlantic. The top right-hand corner is a very lovely old village. We have a lot of those fortress medieval villages in the area. So it's becoming a very popular tourist destination as well. And again, down below you can just see the expanse of water that we have for the dam irrigation. So again, so it's 750 years since the property was boarded. What's interesting there? So we have roughly 40 different grape varieties planted in the vineyards, that reds and whites, and we have 189 actually in the amplographic vineyard, which we're doing experiments with and trying to sort of find varieties for the future that can perhaps cope with climate change as things get hotter and drier, as we expect. Everything's under organic viticulture now. We have we've encouraged bird species and flora, just local conditions for animals and birds and stuff like that. So this is part of the sustainability move that we do have a lot of different cover crops in the vineyards. We don't use any herbicides and pesticides anymore. We do tillage in the rows, and we cut back, we slash back the cover crops, and so that's kind of helping to get more soil, more vibrant soils, more fertility in the overall ecosystem, especially the soils. Another one I think is going to repeat all that. The next slide, showing again some nice pictures of how we've maintained the waterways and encouraged local vegetation and planting cover crops in the vineyard to cut back on tillage and not compact the soil too much. So in 2016 we'd done enough experimental work, so we decided to go fully into organic, but we did it in stages, and it takes 3 years. You once you start on a particular area, you have to have 3 years of it being accompanied by the officials that look after the organic process. So it's taken us from 2016 to 2019 to be or 2020 to be fully. I think 2021's referring to the Douro as well, but in Alentejo, 2019 we were fully organic. and the next couple of years we'll see us fully organic up in the Douro as well. So prior to being organic, we had a system called integrated production, which meant that we only intervened in the vineyard when we absolutely had to. But we could use a very wide range of products, including herbicides and pesticides. So it was on the way to sustainability, but it wasn't complete enough, and we decided we'd go fully into organic and only use contact sprays in the vineyard, and not use herbicides and pesticides in the vineyard, and really try and give back to the soil some vibrancy and some life and some microbiological activity, which we can see happening. So we feel that, you know, within the community we're being much more responsible now in how we're tackling our viticulture. I mean, to be honest, as things were growing in the early times during the 90s and 2000 decades, things were moving so fast that it was you know, these kind of things didn't really even crop up. This is sort of something that's happened in the last 10 years as we've stabilized the company. We've consolidated at Esporao. We've looked at other places to develop into in Portugal, but we've also thought about how we go about our business and how we grow our grapes and what our impact is on the community and the environment. And this has been largely since João Roquette joined the company and sort of put us on a more responsible path and how we run. And that has to do with everything from how much water we used in the winery when we're washing down during the harvest. We used to use about 8 litres of water per litre of wine produced, and that was kind of an industry standard back when I was, you know, studying wine when I was at Roseworthy back in Australia back in the 70s. It was you'd use a lot of water to produce a litre of wine just because you had to clean down the winery and flush through the hoses and all that kind of stuff. And now we've got it down to about 1.5 litres of water per 1 litre of wine that we produce. And everybody is very conscious about using squeegees and using high pressure nozzle hoses and things like that to reduce the amount of water we use in the winery. So it's the sustainability is throughout the whole company. Okay, so these are some shots of the winery. The winery is actually built into a hillside. You don't get to see that the effect of the hillside, but the Adega Montvelho is the Montvelho winery. We're calling it now because that's the main winery, and most of what comes out of there is Montvelho, and that's really the first slide up in the left-hand corner is really the top of the hill, and a lot of the winery then, the storage and is within the hillside, and the fermentation and pressing areas below, we use a lot of gravity for pressing and that sort of thing. So there's a very good there's a lot of good principles in the winery when it was built using gravity and underground storage for the wine. So on the top right hand corner is that I've mentioned a couple of times, the Lagares winery, and so the centerpiece of that are these marble Lagares, which I'm not sure, Joe, if you visited us and you've actually seen them, but you'll know about Lagares from the Douro Valley. And so in the Douro, they're made from granite, local stone. We have a lot of marble in the Alentejo, so we made ours out of marble, and we do defend and like to work with these shallow open tanks where you can foot tread and get a lot of extraction pre-fermentation, and then you kind of we work less. We work them less during the ferment, but we do a lot of initial foot treading to get a lot of extraction before the fermentation starts. On the sides, you can't see very well, but we use cement. We've got a lot of cement tanks now where we ferment and age, and that's part of the organic wine philosophy. That we don't give the organic red wines, which we call colheita. We age them we ferment them and age them in cement tanks. And this new range of cement tanks allow for some micro-oxidation through the walls of the tank. So it's like having your wine in an old barrel, but without the problems that old barrels can sometimes give you. So the cement is, I still find it a bit strange, because we went from cement to stainless steel, and now we're kind of moving back to this new version of cement that you can sort of look after, keep it clean, and you can get some evolution of the wine through these tanks. At the bottom, you can also see the amphoras, or the clay pots, where we basically just crush the grapes in and let them go, and then in November, so we can only press them off roughly 2 months after the harvest. That's part of there's actually the system of how you can make wines in clay pots. And if you want to call your wine an amphora wine, you can only take it off the skins 2 months after the vintage. So it gets a lot of complexity through having been left on skins, because that's how it always happened in the old days, ever since Roman times. So we've kind of plugged into that, and that's kind of a interesting way about. I never thought I'd be making wine like that, but it's actually pretty interesting stuff. As you go down the left-hand side, we've got a lovely wine tasting area at the bottom of our bottom. It's a cellar within the hill. It's a very cool area where we age our bottled wines after the red wines, after bottling, get at least a year or 18 months before they go out in the market. This is the premium wines, the Esporao and above sector. Monteverde, obviously not. We bottle that and release it fairly soon after the bottling. And the barrel storage is a hugely impressive setup, where we now have about 2,000 barrels in that cellar, and that's an underground cellar, naturally cool conditions throughout the year. So yeah, lots of French and American 1, 2, 3. We actually have we keep our barrels now for about 4 or 5 years. So very good aging conditions. Again, Monteverde doesn't. This is more again for our premium Esporão and above wines. And as mentioned, we're in the Douro, where Quinta das Mouras is a fabulous property. I think Wine Society you only at the moment have Acebil, which we're going to taste after, but there's a much bigger range, and there's some pretty amazing stuff coming from that property now. We have mostly vertical vineyards, which is a very unusual thing. If you look at that shot on the left, you can see the vines sloping down, yeah, Mouras is a very unusual property in the Douro, where back in the 50s they experimented a lot with vertical planting, and Mouras was for some reason that was the property that was selected, and we have these fantastic old vines now, vertical vines, planted in the 50s, so they're 70 years old, and they're producing terrific fruit. And then Amial on the right hand side is the Vineyard Verde property, which we're going to taste one of their entry point wines. And so the Amial is a very premium Vineyard Verde estate, based on the Laredo grape variety. Vineyard Verde is a region that produces anything and everything from great Alvarinhos to very industrial, gassy, light, acidic Vineyard Verdes with nice bottles, but not meant to be anything particularly high quality. But Amial produces a very good Laredo that does age fantastically well, and so we're not really talking about Alvarinho here. We're talking about Laredo, but it's considered the best and the most premium Laredo in Vineyard Verde. So we're still working on that. We did our first vintage in 2019. Yeah, still working on that property. Some great varieties that we have. Most of these are, apart from Laredo, which is up at Amial in Vineyard Verde. The other 4 varieties are all varieties that we use at Esporão. Orinto, Antonvaj, and Roupeiro are pretty much the base blends, the base varieties for the Esporão Reserve White, which you have, I think, from time to time. And the Semillon was something that I was able to introduce from the Barossa. I was very keen on Semillon in South Australia, especially the way it's made in the Barossa, which is different to the Hunter. And I was able to plant Semillon at Esporão when I went there in the mid 90s, and so now we have rough Semillon vineyards that are nearly 30 years old, and they're doing really well. We make a very premium white wine, barrel fermented in new oak, and so we have, even though we like to focus on Portuguese grape varieties, we do play around with a little bit of outside stuff, particularly the Semillon. Here's just 4 reds. Aragonage is Tinto Roriz, which is Tempranillo, and it's pretty much all over Portugal in every region. So it does good things in the Douro, more firmer, tighter style wines, and as typically in Alentejo, it's a little bit more spicy and slightly richer, but still quite tannic. Alicante Bouschet is becoming this kind of go-to variety in Alentejo because it does particularly well in the heat, because it's a cross variety between Grenache and Petit Bouschet, so it's a red juice variety that handles the heat particularly well. So it's something that will always now become probably an increasingly important grape variety. Touriga Franca is actually, the main variety in the Douro now. If you like, I think you can say Touriga Franca is the most popular red grape in the Douro now. Touriga Nacional is perhaps more at home in the Dow, does particularly well in the Dow region, I think. But anyway, all these varieties do quite well. Touriga Nacional has been in the Alentejo for a long time, and Touriga Franca is relatively new, but increasingly we like it. It's a little bit less obvious than Touriga Nacional, and has a bit more body, a bit more richness than Touriga. So there's just a shot of the winery, the Montvellier winery, which is, we actually rebuilt this winery in 2018. So we've only done 2 vintages in the new winery, but it's working. When we built this winery, when we rebuilt the old winery, we increased the capacity of the receival area and the fermentation area by 50%, because normally our harvest can take up to 8 weeks, and with this increasingly hot weather, climate change influence, the grapes are ripening faster and faster all the time, and our window of opportunity to get all the grape varieties at the right maturity is becoming more difficult. So we basically want to get through our harvest in 5 weeks, and to do that, when we rebuilt the winery, we added an extra roughly 50% capacity, so that we could it's not to say it's going to happen every year, but increasingly the years are getting hotter, and so that if we are having problems and ripening is happening too quickly, we can get the fruit in faster now than we could in the past, which is a good thing. So the 19, having said that, so the 19 which did well in while we're doing this this broadcast, the 19 was made in the 2nd year of this new winery. So it's a good example of perhaps we were able to maintain the freshness better in 19 than perhaps we would have done otherwise if we hadn't rebuilt the winery. Okay, so I think the plan now is to move into the tasting. It's enough of me rambling on. So I've got my bottle and glass handy. I'm going to pour it as we go.
Shall I just say a couple of words about this wine? This is going to be new to everybody. So regrettably, it's rather selfishly, it's only us that have it. But it's one of the first wines to come out of the investment into Quinta de Amial. So this is a new entry point level is the wrong term, but a more approachable level. It's a blend. It's not pure Loureiro. And because we've got quite a lot of vineyard already, I didn't have a space to have it straight away in the main list. But I bought a bottle for wine without fuss, plus a bit more. So this wine, it'll certainly be going out in wine without fuss towards the end of the year, but hopefully it'll be available over the summer as well. So it's just it's a lovely, beautifully presented new vineyard blend. So when that appears, have a look out for it. Bico Amarello. Yeah,
it's I'm just getting familiar with it too, because this is something new that we've only just started, and I'm for sure. I mean, Joe, for this, to me, it really, I know it's, it's a good price point wine, but it definitely over delivers. I mean, there's deliberately, there's no gas in it to take it away from that, the run of the mill vineyards. There's no residual sugar. So that tends to be how vineyards, the cheaper vineyards, get along, because they have a lot of acidity. If you have some gas and sugar there, you can cover up those kind of, if you like, sort of faulty things. But so this is exactly as it should be. It's 11.5% alcohol, fantastic acidity, no residual sugar, no CO2 to sort of get in the way. And I really think it really does over deliver for what it is. And it's a lovely, there's actually some quite good depth of fruit on the palate. It's not a sort of lean style. It's there's definitely...
No, there's lovely ripe fruit there. So yeah, so look out for that over the next few weeks, because it may well make an early appearance if we can squeeze it in. What we thought we'd do this evening is to just taste one wine from each of the three properties. So the Vineyard, and then we've got the Montvellier Red, the Wine Champs winner, and then we've got the Asubio d'Oro from Morsas. So David, I don't know which of the two reds you think we should taste first.
I think when we did the trial run, we thought we'd do the Asubio first and finish off with the Champ. And it's a very good tasting, Joe, because I ran through them just before we came on air, and to see Asubio and Montvellier together, because they are in their own right, similar price quality brackets. Probably Asubio is a little more expensive than Montvellier, but it's parallel to what happens in the Douro, what happens in Alentejo. The top end Alentejo reds are cheaper than the top end. And so these two, the Asubio and the Montvellier, will be a very good tasting to sort of highlight the differences between the two regions in similar kind of price point wines.
Yep.
So Asubio is actually, in Portuguese, it means to whistle. In the Portuguese language, the word means to whistle. And when we bought the property, the Asubio vineyard, we found. The vineyard wasn't called Asubio at the time, but there was a kind of a whistling sound. It's quite a high altitude vineyard, and the wind as it came through the vineyard would make a kind of whistling sound. So we grabbed the name and called the wine Asubio. Nowadays it's partly from that vineyard, and we also buy some grapes in now to maintain the volume. It's a wine that's very well put together and very well made. Quite lifted Douro, those lifted Douro aromatics to do with the Tourigas and the Roriz, and it's a reflection of the fact that you have vineyards at higher altitude, that you get this elegance and freshness in the wine, but still quite noticeable tannin and acidity on the finish, which sets it apart from Alentejo. I mean, it's interesting when you taste these two wines, because this is a 2017 and the Montvellier 2019, and yet this is even with 2 years extra time in the bottle, it's still firmer and more structured on the palate than the Montvellier. So they're both they come through very well.
Yeah, I love that with Douro Reds generally, but this wine does it very well. That lovely combination of that gorgeous, ripe, very perfumed fruit, but kept really nice and clean and under control by that freshness and that little bit of tannic grip. Which is delicious.
Yeah, no, I mean, if for what it is,
it's like a big hug.
you could easily keep that wine for 5 years, and it's just going to get so much better as it goes along. And the color is amazing. It's the color of the two wines. I looked at them together, and there's almost no difference. It's a very deep, bright. There's almost a little bit of violet, crimson color in that, and it's been in the bottle for 2 years. Very, very, very fresh, very elegant, very typical of what typical of what we were trying to do when we went up to the Douro. We wanted to make something that would be complex, elegant, balanced, but have some, even at this level, have some ageability.
And very nice to see that actually in both cases, these wines are 13.5 on the label. You know, it's very easy for Portuguese wines to go over that. Some years it's harder for you than others, but great to see them at 13.5.
Yeah. Well, I'll just go back to that what I said before about the winery and having that extra capacity so that we can get the fruit in, so that we're not getting these over the top, alcoholic wines. Yeah. But this is, this, Joe, I have to be careful what I say here, because it's not that I don't rate Montpellier, but I very rarely, I don't drink it that often. And the reason for that is that when I'm at home, my wife's vegetarian and we tend to have a lot of fish. And she much prefers white wine, so we drink a lot more white wine at home. But having said that, this wine slightly chilled with fish would be absolutely perfect. It's beautifully soft and silky, and it just comes together on the finish with this, some nice tannin and stuff on the finish. But it's just so juicy and smooth and lovely. Yeah.
I have to say, it's a wine I've been drinking probably since before I worked for the Symingtons, which was before the Wine Society.
Yeah.
They used to look after Montpellier here in the UK, and so I've been drinking it ever since. And it's a super. It's a really real family staple.
Yeah, Joe. Honestly, it's probably a better wine now than it was 20 years ago when we started, because there's a better selection of grape varieties now in the Alentejo than there was before, and where we do get a lot of the fruit coming in from farmers. But over the years, they've planted more and more Syrah and Touriga Nacional, and so there's a much better there's better base material now than there was when we started. We were using a lot of Castelao or Periquita, Moretos and Carignans, and sort of some, we have much better fruit to play with now. And also, it's something you learn as you grow in the winery and as a winemaker, that we have bigger pumps, we have bigger hoses, we have bigger tanks, and to make a 4 million litre blend now using maybe half million litre tanks is much better than making a 500,000 litre blend and using 20,000 or 40,000 litre tanks, where the components are, you're playing around much more with smaller volumes and smaller. You can actually make you can actually make these wines better, even though the volumes are increasing.
And it's one reason why they're so consistent too. Now, I know Catherine is itching to ask some questions or feed in some questions to you, David. Catherine,
yes.
Sorry, we've been...
No, not at all. I've just enjoyed listening to it. I found it quite amusing. I was reading on the website how the Montpellier was launched in 1992, and it's quite personal because I also was launched in 1992, so I feel I have some kinship to the wine. So it's been lovely listening to you both and listening to the presentation. So we do have some questions. The first one is from Ian Mackenzie, who can't actually be with us tonight, but I know he is going to be catching up on YouTube. So his question is for you, David, and it is based on you being Australian, actually, and understanding the merits of a screw top to protect a wine, and why that's perhaps not considered as an option for Esporao.
Yeah, well, it isn't.
Did you see this question, David?
No, I was probably looking at the slides.
No. Because somebody told me that you're actually moving towards screw cap.
Well, we're really only moving towards screw cap in markets that are insisting on it. So because we're in Alentejo and we're right in the hot spot of the cork forests, and there is an ecological issue here that I mean, the Alentejo cork forests are they're a big sink for carbon, capturing carbon and releasing oxygen, and okay, I obviously I'm not happy if I open a bottle of wine with cork taint, but it's not as big an issue as it used to be, and certainly the top end of wines now you can there are corks that are 100% guaranteed to, cork taint free, and so it's pretty unlikely these days you get an expensive wine that's that will have cork taint. Obviously it's a nuisance even at the lower end. But okay, for me, I would put I would put Bicamarella into a. Bicamarella would be perfectly normal to put that into a screw cap. Even Montvellier, I think the white and the red could go into a screw cap. I'm a little concerned with screw cap. Sometimes there's, they can be a bit reductive. They can be, unless they've been handled properly before they go into the bottle. Screw cap can seem to enhance reductive characters in the wines, and there are there are some issues with screw cap that I think still haven't been ironed out completely. And I know I get this all the time. I go back to Australia for holidays, and I take my Portuguese wines with me. And if I go to someone's place, nobody has a corkscrew, because there aren't any wines with cork in Australia anymore. So I got to take my own corkscrews when I go back to Australia. But I've seen wines, and there is a bit of an issue with the screw cap does hold the wines back for sure. So if they're really high-end wines, I think cork does give you a better result in a high-end wine. If you're talking about low-end wines, then I think the arguments are much stronger for screw cap. That's for sure. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question we've got is from John Lamond. I hope I've said that right. John, if you're ready, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, almost right, is Lamond. But okay. Good evening. Thanks for that. That was really great. You're handling obviously a great number of grape varieties, and also working over a great number of, or a large number of soil types. Do you have any of the soil types, or the soil areas rather, that are phylloxera free?
Not that I'm aware of. Not in the Alentejo, because the soils are quite well structured, and that sort of helps phylloxera to move and to maintain in the soil. There, as you probably know, there are some areas in Portugal that are phylloxera free, but they're very sandy soils on the coast where phylloxera can't survive. But as far as I know, nobody's planting vineyards on without rootstocks in the Alentejo.
I'm aware of a small site, because there's a wine that we have bought, a Moreto wine that we've bought, and it's from very sandy soils next to a lake, and the name of the lake escapes me at the moment, but I think that's probably why they're able to have those wines there on their own rootstocks, because it's very sandy alluvial soils next to this lake, and presumably which by a river.
Okay, yeah, I may have missed out on that.
Okay, so the next question that we've got is from Adam Chadwick, and it's again directed to you, David, and it's a little two-parter. So it was, what was it that made you settle in Portugal? And have there been any sort of headaches from going organic, particularly from sort of wildlife within the vineyards, or any sort of hiccups along the way?
Yeah, it's good. A couple of quite diverse questions there, really. I certainly didn't come to Portugal because I wanted to do organic viniculture at Esporao. No, I did enology in Australia, and then I came to Europe to do harvests and work around. I worked in Germany and France and did harvests, and then I finished up in Portugal for a holiday, and I met my future wife in Lisbon, actually on the beach. So there's a nice little story within a story there. So it's really so it's on the back of being in Europe. So the wine interest was the first thing, and then obviously there was a female interest as well. And in fact, we travelled back to Australia and got married in Australia. I worked in the Barossa Valley for a few years, and then I came back with her to live in Portugal full time, and that was in 1982. So I've been in Portugal now for going on for 40 years. So getting into organic viticulture, not so much in terms of pests and disease so far, because Alentejo is quite a hot, dry climate, and so we don't have a lot of humidity issues. Possibly we have some issues with leaf hoppers, and we used to have to spray pesticide, insecticides or something. For what we're trying to do now is encourage bats. We've got these sort of bat traps and bat nests in the vineyard, and because bats eat a lot of insects, and we're hoping they'll eat the cicadella insects at the right time in the right place. But it's kind of a work in progress with that. One thing that I'll just as kind of a little bit of an aside, when a lot of people are spraying a white clay product. The commercial name is kaolin, and it's a white clay. It's a bit like when we go to the beach and we put sunscreen on. So we're spraying this stuff on, and it does help to reflect the heat a bit and lower the overall temperature in the vineyard, which helps lower the transpiration rate and things like that. So it's quite widely used. It's used in Australia now, and it's used mostly a lot of in the Alentejo now. People are spraying their vineyards to keep them from sunburn and to keep the temperature down a little bit. So, and on the back of that, if we found that we're keeping the leafhopper issue down, because they're not attacking. They like to attack the soft green leaves in the early part of the season, and if we have this sunscreen, if you like, on the leaves, it seems to be helping that issue. So it's something that's come about through climate change and excessive heat. But one thing about organic, not so much so we're not finding any major problems in the vineyard yet. From a winemaking perspective, I don't know whether it seemed to me we've had to sort of hold back a little bit on our fermentation pumping over regimes, like getting less extraction. We seem to we don't need to seem to have to extract quite as much. I don't know whether it's to do with the fact that the varieties, the grapes, because we're encouraging them to self-protect, and maybe the skins are getting harder because they're not getting so much protection from sprays. That in the winery, if we have the same pump over regimes that we used to have, the wines are quite hard and tannic, and so we're having to keep pressing. We've never kept pressings back. We always add the pressings because we need the tannin usually. Now we're finding that we're having to keep the press fraction back a little bit, and we're sort of doing more whole berries, pumping over less to get a kind of that more softer, typical Alentejo wine style, and not bringing too much. This is the red wines, by the way, but not introducing too much tannin structure and hardness into the wines, which has to do with it's empirical kind of thinking, but I think it's to do with the skins perhaps getting a bit tougher.
Perfect. So we do just have one last question, and I know you mentioned that you eat a lot of vegetarian sort of food and fish at home, but if you were eating meat, or if you were going to eat anything with the Montbellier, what sort of thing would you pair with it? And Joe,
well, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of lamb, a lot of lamb in the Alentejo. So typically roast lamb is suggested for our wines in general, but that would be Montbellier and also even Esporao. But I think Montbellier does go very well with roast lamb. I think it's good. I think it'd be good with most pasta dishes as well. Italian pasta, spaghetti, bolognese, that kind of thing. Any kind of pasta dishes. I think that soft tannins, that sort of juicy, soft, especially this 19, I think would be particularly good with pasta. But otherwise, yeah, roast lamb couldn't go wrong with that.
One of the things that I've loved about traveling in the Alentejo region and in Portugal generally, but certainly in Alentejo, is wonderful charcuterie, cold meat, sausages, really tasty stuff.
Yeah.
Some of it quite rustic, but just gorgeous flavors. actually this is a kind of a house food. We love that kind of food at home, and this sort of wine is so adaptable. So it's great to have on hand, a bit like a Southern French red, you know, like a Saint-Chinion or a Minervois, that kind of thing. You think of it in the same kind of vein. And just the same way, whether it's for a smarter leg of lamb or those kind of more picnic type meals, which are just delicious.
Yeah, some soft cheeses, you know, that would be good. The charcuterie and cheese would be just some nice fresh crusty bread. That's all you need, really.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I think
getting hungry. It's getting very close to dinner time. Probably more for you.
On that note is an excellent point to come to a natural close on. Otherwise, everyone will just be leaving to raid their larders, I'm sure. But thank you very much, David and Joe, for joining us. If anyone did want the presentation, we can send that to you as well. So do let us know if you would like that. But I think it's all to say, so thank you very much and have a lovely evening, both.
I'm conscious that we didn't manage to get to all the questions, but we will certainly follow that up, and we might beg on a bit more of David's time and ask him if he wouldn't respond to some of the more specific questions too.
Joe, anything, I don't know what format you do it in, but if it's emails or anything like that, no worries. Okay, no worries.
And one last thank you from me. There was I think I've already mentioned Jamie Good, who's a wine writer, who's a fanatic on Portuguese wine. He did a seminar in the UK last autumn, and he talked about Portugal as a country that didn't modernize, which I think is very apt for the Portugal of old, and it's still some of the joy of going to Portugal now. But I think, David, you have been you've played a huge part in that modernization of Portugal and making Portuguese wines the reliable and delicious wines that they are, thoroughly deserving of a wider audience. So thank you to you, because you've been a tremendous ambassador for Portugal, not just for Esporao. So thank you.
Thanks.
It's always, for your time tonight.
Always good to catch up. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Cheers. See you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your support. Terrific.